If you were to ask an Israeli what the Western Wall is, he or she would probably tell you that it is the most sacred place in the world for Jews and that it was part of the Second Temple. Both of these beliefs are incorrect. It is not part of the temple itself, and it is not the holiest sites for the Jews. The bigger the symbol, the less people really know about it, and in this video I'm going to explain it all. Before I talk about the Western Wall and how and when it came to be holy, I will say that the holiest place for Jews is Temple Mount, where the two temples once stood and where the Dome of the Rock stands today. And by the way, to say that there were two temples is also not 100% correct. There were actually 4 Jewish temples, and I will talk about that in a minute. The important thing to understand is that 2,000 years ago, when the Western Wall was built and the temple was still standing, the Western Wall had no religious meaning whatsoever. The area next to the wall was a street. In order to understand what the Western Wall is, you have to go back to the beginning, 3,000 years ago. King Solomon built the first temple. It stood at the top of Mount Moriah. This is also the place where, according to the Bible, Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac. The temple that King Solomon built stood for 400 years until the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem and destroyed it in 586 BCE. The Holy Ark and the Ten Commandments, which were inside the temple, were lost or destroyed, and the Jews were expelled from the land of Israel. 70 years later, the Jews were permitted to return, and it was then that they built the second temple, or to be more precise, the first second temple. The first second temple was very small and modest. 200 years later, in the 2nd century BCE, the second temple was probably demolished and then built all over again, this time bigger and more fancy. This was the third temple. And 2,000 years ago, at the time of King Herod, the temple was rebuilt again, this time as a huge temple, one of the biggest in the world. So Herod temple is the 4th temple. So if there were 4 different temples, why do we say that there were only 2? The reason is that from the time that the Jews came back from Babylon exile in 516 BCE until the Romans destroyed the temple in the year 70, the temple kept on functioning as such pretty much consistently, even when being rebuilt. By functioning, I mean that they kept on sacrificing animals to God. To understand what the Western Wall is, we need to talk about the last temple. King Herod decided to build an enormous temple. He had a small problem though. The temple stood on a peak of a mountain where there was only limited space. King Herod, who was known for his massive building project, decided he would build 4 huge supporting walls around the mountain peak and transform it into a great level platform. And on this man-made platform, he would rebuild the temple. The Western Wall is actually a small part of the large supporting wall. 2,000 years ago, the area next to the Western Wall was just a street. So how did it become holy? In the year 70, during the Jewish rebellion against the Romans, Jerusalem was conquered and the temple was destroyed. There is nothing left of the temple itself. After the rebellion, Jews were not permitted to go up to the area of Temple Mount, where the temple had stood, and started praying next to different parts of the retaining walls, as they were the closest place to the temple that Jews were allowed to visit. Over the last 2,000 years, Jews have prayed next to different sections of the retaining walls. First, they pray next to the southern wall, where the original entrance to Temple Mount itself had been. Then they prayed next to the Golden Gate or Mercy Gate in the eastern walls, which is located outside the old city. And it is only in the last 500 years that the small part of the huge retaining wall that we call the Western Wall has become the main place where we can remember the temple. So why this particular part? As happens very often, there are 2 reasons, the practical one and the religious one, both being very important. The technical is that it is next to the Jewish quarter. This area has been the Jewish quarter for the last 600 years. And the religious reason is that the temple itself didn't stand exactly in the middle of the Temple Mount. It was a bit closer to the western side, hence making the western side more holy. some Jewish groups have even said that it is better to pray here and not on Temple Mount itself, because in the original temple there was a part that all citizens were allowed to enter, another part that only the priest could enter, and the Holy of Holies, which was accessible only to the high priest on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Since we don't know exactly where the temple stood, it is better not to take any chances and to just go to the place where the Holy of Holies was. Another interesting fact that can be easily seen yet not often thought about is that the Western Wall has 4 different layers. The area where people pray is the part that King Herod built. You can see the huge chisel stone, and then above them the stones that are smaller and differently sized, which were added by the Muslims in the 8th century. The small stones at the top date from the Ottoman era, and the last row was built by the British about 100 years ago. I bet you didn't know that when you started to watch this video, that the British built a tiny and relatively insignificant part of the Western Wall. Now, one last thing. I've talked about the temples, about the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, different traditions that have changed throughout the years. But let's talk about the most important thing. What was held there? What was inside the holiest place in the temple? In the first one, there was the Ark of the Covenant and the 10 Commandments, but they were lost or destroyed when the Babylonians destroyed the first temple. What was in the Dvir, the small room, the Holy of Holies, which only the high priest would enter once a year? Nothing. It was empty, or rather full of Hashchina, the presence of God. I find that very interesting and very deep. Jews, Muslims, Christians all believe in a God, the same God which can't be seen. And the big question is, are there prayers, ritual, house of worship, fast, rabbis, priests, and imams help us get closer to God, or are they maybe rather distracting us from the divine? I'm going to answer a few frequently asked questions. The Western Wall is the most visited site in Israel. It is open 24/7. The Wailing Wall is basically an open-air synagogue, so men and women are separated. Why is the men's section bigger than the women's? Men have to pray and women don't have to. So in every synagogue, the men's section is bigger. And as I said, this is an open-air synagogue. You might also say that in Judaism, like in many other religions, men have a more important role to play than women do. Anyone can walk up to the wall, pray here, or just have a look, but do be respectful of others, a rule that is good to employ generally. There is a tradition of writing your wishes on a piece of paper and placing it between the stones. Now, what happens to all the notes? Well, 3 times a year they are removed and buried on the Mount of Olives, not far from here, which is an ancient cemetery where Jews have been buried for the last 3,000 years. The notes can be thrown in the trash because some have the name of God written on them. From Friday evening to Saturday evening, you are not allowed to take photos or smoke within the perimeter. Knees and shoulders must be covered. Today we can only see a small part of the Western Wall. If you want to see it all, you need to go underground and join the Western Wall tunnel tour, which I highly recommend. I will leave all the details below. I have been to the Western Wall with groups many times, and I've noticed that while the guides talk about the history, the travelers tend to ask about the people. So a few words about what you can see. To understand Jewish life and customs, you need to understand the importance of the halakha, the Jewish religious rules. One of the main differences between Judaism and Christianity is that Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah and follow his teaching accordingly. Judaism, on the other hand, centers around the halakha, an elaborate system of rules that Jews are supposed to adhere to. The 10 Commandments are the most well-known laws, but there are actually 613 commandments laid out in the Jewish Bible, and throughout the generations, rabbis have added thousands of rules that cover every single aspect of life. There are rules on how to wash your hands, how to dress, which sock you should put on first, which shoe you should tie first, which blessing you have to say before you eat bread or meat or fruits. Do all Jews follow all the rules? No, most are somewhere in the middle. The ultra-Orthodox keep all of the rules, but I should add that each group follows a slightly different set of rules. Haredi Jews or ultra-Orthodox Jews make up about 12% of the Jewish population in Israel, some 1,200,000 people in all. The first thing you notice about them is, of course, what they are wearing. Their long black clothing make them stand out, which is also one of its purpose, to differentiate them from their surrounding. Another of its purpose is modesty. Like many other religious groups, they also make sure to cover themselves up. Jews haven't always dressed this way. King Solomon didn't wear black clothing and a fur hat in the middle of summer. This way of dressing began around 200-300 years ago in Eastern Europe. These clothes serve as a kind of uniform in the same way that army uniforms immediately single out a soldier and show his rank and position. Haredi clothing single out the Haredi Jew. There are special outfits for the Shabbat and for regular weekdays, for married and for single people, and for different geographical origins. You may at first think that they are all wearing a uniform black, but a closer look will reveal the difference between the outfits. Some wear long black jackets, others dark blue. Some wear tall hats and other smaller ones. Some wear black socks while others wear white socks. And some married women cover their hair while others wear wigs. Another thing that you will probably notice is the sidelocks. In the book of Leviticus, it is written, "You shall not round shave the corners of your head." The origin of this prohibition probably lies in the fact that non-Jews shaved around their heads. It is not written that you must grow out your hair, only that you should not shave it. But religious Jews customarily grow out their sidelock as a sign of piety. The sidelocks, like their clothing, indicate which religious group the person belonged to. Some place their sidelock inside their hats, some tuck them behind their ears, some have short sidelocks, and others let their long curled sidelocks blow with the wind. You will notice that when the Jews pray, they wrap a small box around their hand and head. This is called Tefillin. Religious Jews men pray 3 times a day. The Shacharit, the morning prayer, is when they put on the Tefillin, which are 2 small boxes attached to leather straps. One wound to the forehead and the other wound around the arms. There is a small parchment rolled up inside the box that has a number of passages from the Bible written on it, including the passage that explains the reason for the Tefillin. And you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be as fortlets between your eyes. What exactly are fortlets? No one really knows the meaning of the word, but 2,000-year-old Tefillin were found in the Judean desert, proving that the Tefillin used back then were similar to the Tefillin used today. When Jews pray, you will notice that they cover themselves with a shal. A Tallit is the Jewish prayer shal. It is usually made of wool. There are 2 kinds of talitot, the plural of talit. One that the observant Jews cover themselves when they pray, and another that they wear under their shirt. You will see the 4 tassels hanging out the shirt. Wearing a talit is one of the biblical commandments. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, throughout the generations to come, you are to make tassels on the corners of your garments. You will have these tassels to look at, and so you will remember all the commandments of the Lord. From here we continue to the Jewish quarter, but I would just like to add that you can also start the City of David tour here. This video is taken from my app, Jerusalem with Oren. Now, if you've watched this video up until now, then you've probably enjoyed it. So that means you will love the app. All the relevant links will be below. Yalla bye.